My family saw me again after 7 years. My father said, "Just a dancer who ran away." My mother said she wished I had never been born. My brother said I wasn't family. Then they turned their backs. They didn't wait for my reaction. That part stayed with me more than the words. My father didn't pause to see if I would argue. My mother didn't hesitate or soften or check the room. My brother didn't look uncomfortable saying it. They said what they came to say and turned away as if the conversation had ended years ago and they were simply closing a door they had already shut. I stayed where I was, not frozen, not shocked, just still. People nearby kept talking. Laughter rose from a table behind me. Someone clinked a glass. The gala didn't slow down for what had just happened. No one noticed a family quietly dismantling one of its own. That was the part that hurt the most, not the cruelty, but how normal it looked. I didn't follow them. I let my mother walk away without calling her name. I let my father keep his word. I let my brother's verdict stand. Because at that moment, something became very clear. They hadn't come to reconnect. They hadn't come to reconcile. They hadn't even come out of curiosity. They came to confirm that I was still small enough to dismiss. When they were done, they walked away. I let them. The gala itself was everything it was supposed to be: polished, expensive, efficient. A room designed to celebrate power without ever naming it directly. No banners, no speeches about struggle, just the quiet confidence of people who assumed they belonged there. I wasn't the main guest. My name wasn't on the printed program. I wasn't seated at a table with a placard or a sponsor's logo. I hadn't been invited for who I was, only for what I could do. I was there as a performer, a collaborator, and a detail. I arrived alone with no +1, no family, no one scanning the room for me when I walked in. That was why my family didn't recognize me at first. They entered the way they always had. My father slightly ahead. My mother smiling at the right people. My brother already nodding as if he belonged in every conversation before it started. They were greeted immediately. Hands reached for them. Names were exchanged. Compliments flowed. They hadn't changed. They still moved like people who expected doors to open. I noticed them before they noticed me. That had always been the pattern. For a moment, I considered stepping away, letting the encounter never happen, preserving the distance I'd spent 7 years building. But I didn't move. I was tired of shrinking to avoid collisions that weren't my fault. When they finally saw me, it took a second too long. My mother's eyes slid past me once before coming back. My father tilted his head, trying to place my face. My brother recognized me last, not because he couldn't, but because he hadn't expected to need to. The pause was brief, just long enough to register surprise. Then the old hierarchy snapped back into place. My father laughed first. Not loud, not cruel-sounding to anyone else, the kind of laugh men use when they think they're being reasonable. "So," he said, looking me up and down, "you're still dancing, not working, not performing, dancing." My mother didn't smile. "I told you," she said, her voice flat. "This is what happens when you throw your life away." My brother stepped in like he always had, turning judgment into policy. "She made her choice," he said. "She's not family anymore." There it was, clean, final, approved. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list credits or explain why I was there. I didn't tell them how long it had taken to stand in that room without shaking. They weren't listening. They never were. They said what they needed to say, not to me, but to themselves, and turned away without hesitation or a glance back, as if there was nothing left for me to do there. I stood there longer than I should have, not because I hoped they'd return, but because I wanted to be sure I didn't move out of instinct. I wanted to know that when I finally did, it would be because I chose to. Around me the gala flowed on. People brushed past, unaware of the quiet collapse that had just happened near the edge of their world. That was when it hit me. I had lived 7 years without them. 7 years without calls, without holidays, without anyone checking if I landed on my feet, and somehow I was still standing. The realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt factual. The silence they had perfected over the years hurt more than the words they had just used. Silence requires consistency. Silence means you've decided someone isn't worth the effort of cruelty anymore. I had already survived that. This was only confirmation. 7 years ago, I walked out of their house with one bag and no plan. They didn't call. They didn't check if I was safe. They didn't wonder if I had a place to sleep or food to eat. The door closed, and I disappeared from their version of the family story as cleanly as if I had never existed. I used to think that meant I had failed them. Now I understood it meant something else entirely. They had never planned to keep me in the first place. The room shifted around me. Voices lowered slightly. Bodies angled toward something I couldn't see yet. I looked up and realized the energy had changed, not dramatically but noticeably. People were preparing for something. An announcement maybe. A speech. The kind of thing that happens at events like this where recognition is handed out like currency and everyone pretends not to be waiting for their name. I had no reason to expect anything. My role here was clear. I was in the background. I was functioning. I was the person who showed up, did the work, and left without needing acknowledgement. That was fine. I had learned how to be useful without being visible. It was safer that way. But something felt different tonight. There was a weight in the air I couldn't name, a tension I hadn't anticipated. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that the encounter with my family had shaken something loose in me, and now I was seeing meaning where there was none. Still, I stayed. I didn't move toward the exit. I didn't slip into the hallway or find a corner to disappear into. I stayed exactly where I was, watching the room rearrange itself around whatever was coming next. My family was somewhere in the crowd, absorbed into conversations that mattered to them, already moving on from the daughter they had dismissed 7 years ago, and dismissed again tonight. They had made their position clear. I was still nothing, still irrelevant, still just a girl who had thrown her life away chasing something that didn't matter. They were so sure of that. I wondered briefly what it would feel like when they realized they were wrong. The room at the gala didn't disappear. It thinned. Voices dulled into a low hum like a radio playing in another apartment. The lights softened into something less precise. I stayed where I was, watching the stage crew adjust a microphone I wouldn't touch for a while. Then a scent cut through everything. Not perfume, not food, polish. The kind my mother used to wipe the dining table every Sunday afternoon, even when no one was coming over. That was all it took. The gala slid out of focus, and the past didn't arrive gently. It didn't ask permission. It pushed its way back and fully formed, already confident it belonged. In our house, nothing was ever called love. It was called potential. My parents didn't talk about their children the way other parents did. They talked about us the way people talk about investments, long-term, return on effort, risk management. They never said it outright. They didn't have to. Praise came with numbers attached, grades, rankings, letters with letterheads. Applause arrived only after proof. Affection followed success like an accessory. The system was simple. Perform well, and you were seen. My brother understood that early. He fit into it the way a missing piece snaps into place, not because he tried, but because the shape was already his. Teachers loved him. Coaches trusted him. Mistakes slid off him like they didn't quite stick. When he failed a test, my parents said he was burned out. When he lost a competition, they said he was learning resilience. Failure in his case was framed as growth. Mine was framed as a character. If I forgot something, it meant I was careless. If I questioned something, it meant I was difficult. If I didn't excel fast enough, it meant I wasn't trying hard enough. No one announced these rules. They repeated themselves until everyone learned them, including me. There was a moment small enough to be overlooked when I realized I was playing a different game. I was 13. My brother was 14. We were sitting at the kitchen table with our report cards spread out in front of us. His grades were excellent. Mine were good, not perfect, but solid. My mother smiled at him first. She reached for mine second. Her smile paused. "Why isn't this higher?" she asked, tapping one subject with her finger. I opened my mouth to explain the teacher the curve, the extra credit I hadn't had time to finish, but my father cut in before I could finish the first sentence. "You always have a reason," he said. My brother shifted in his chair just slightly, not uncomfortable, not pleased, just aware. Later that week, my brother missed a deadline on a project. The teacher emailed home. My parents laughed about it at dinner. "He's overloaded," my mother said. We can't expect perfection." No one looked at me when she said it. That was when I understood that expectations weren't shared evenly. They were assigned. I didn't rebel. That's the part people get wrong. I didn't slam doors or sneak out or announce dramatic ultimatums. I didn't even ask for special treatment. I asked questions, and in our family, questions were treated like challenges. My mother said I was being sensitive. My father said I was overthinking. My brother said, "They're just trying to help." He didn't say it unkindly. That was what made it worse. He learned how to translate the system for them, how to make exclusion sound reasonable, how to say the right thing so no one had to feel guilty. He became the gatekeeper without ever being asked. The label arrived during a family dinner when my aunt was visiting. Someone asked about me, what I liked, what I wanted to do. I hesitated before answering. "I like dancing," I said. "I've been taking classes after school." My mother laughed, not loudly, just enough. "Oh," she said, waving the hand, "she's the creative one." Everyone smiled. The conversation moved on. No one corrected it. No one added anything. No one asked follow-up questions. The words settled into place like a nameplate screwed onto a door. Creative, not serious, not reliable, not essential. From then on, everything I did passed through that filter. If I struggled, it was because I was unfocused. If I succeeded, it was because I'd been lucky. The label didn't limit me immediately. It just quietly explained why I didn't belong in certain rooms. The real break came with an announcement at dinner. My parents had decided something about the future, something big involving money planning and years ahead. My brother had been consulted. His preferences were discussed. His concerns were addressed. I found out at the same time as the salt being passed. I asked one question. Not an accusation, just a question. Was there a reason no one asked me? The room shifted. My father leaned back slightly, as if preparing for a lecture. My mother's face tightened in that familiar way. My brother looked at his plate. "This is what's best for the family," my mother said. "You wouldn't understand the logistics," my father added. My brother finally looked up. "It's not personal," he said. "It just makes sense." That was the moment, not because of what was said, but because of who was allowed to speak. 3 voices aligned, 1 excluded. No one raised their voice, no one threatened anything. But the decision stood. I realized then that I wasn't part of the planning. I was part of the outcome. I went to my room that night and sat on the edge of my bed with the door closed. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't write in a journal or call a friend. I just sat there in the dark trying to understand what had just happened. It wasn't the decision itself that hurt. It was the fact that no one had considered me worth consulting, not even as a formality, not even as a courtesy. I had been erased from the process so completely that my absence hadn't even registered as unusual. I looked around my room. The trophies from dance competitions, my parents never attended the books I'd bought with my own money because no one asked what I was reading, the desk where I'd done homework alone every night while my brother got help downstairs. This room was mine, but the house wasn't. The family wasn't. I had been living in a space that tolerated me without ever truly making room for me. That was when I started to understand. I wasn't failing to fit in. I was never supposed to fit in the first place. I tried after that. I really did. I adjusted my tone. I worked harder. I made myself smaller in conversations that weren't meant for me. I tried to anticipate expectations instead of questioning them. The more I complied, the less room there was for me. Silence became safer than explanation. Observation replaced participation. I learned when to nod, when to smile, when to excuse myself. From the outside, it looked like maturity. From the inside, it felt like erasure. Slowly, without anyone announcing it, my role solidified. My brother was the future. My parents were the architects, and I was the variable that needed managing. Back at the gala, the sound came rushing back in. Laughter sharpened. Music regained its shape. Someone brushed past me, apologizing absently. I blinked, grounding myself in the present. Now I understood why they had turned their backs so easily tonight. They weren't being cruel. They were being consistent. I hadn't failed them. I had failed the role they had already written for me. And the worst part, I had spent years trying to prove them wrong, trying to earn a place that was never going to be offered, no matter how hard I worked or how much I changed. It was time to stop trying. The morning I left didn't feel important. That was the strange part. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices, no tension thick enough to cut through. The house moved the way it always did, predictable, efficient, untouched by the idea that something irreversible was about to happen. My father read the news at the table. My mother stood at the counter making notes on a pad she kept for later. My brother scrolled through his phone, already half somewhere else. No one looked at me. Breakfast tasted like routine, the kind that convinces you nothing is wrong. That's how endings hide. They dress up as ordinary. The announcement came casually, mid-sip, mid-sentence, as if it were just another logistical update that didn't require discussion. My parents had decided something about the future, about education, about direction, about what made sense long-term. They spoke in plurals. We think this is best. We've considered all the options. We're moving forward with it. They didn't ask if I agreed. They didn't even ask if I understood. They explained it to me the way you explain weather to someone without an umbrella. I listened. I nodded. I waited for the part where my opinion entered the room. It never did. That was the moment, the quiet, precise moment, when something inside me stopped trying to keep up. I asked one question. Just one. Why wasn't I asked, not why did you choose this? Not why don't I matter? Just that. The room shifted in response, like a system detecting an error. My father lowered the paper slightly, his eyes narrowing, not angry but alert. My mother sighed already, tired of the conversation she hadn't agreed to have. My brother leaned back, crossing his arms, a practiced gesture I'd seen before. "This isn't about you," my mother said. My father followed quickly. "We're making responsible decisions." I opened my mouth again, slower this time. "I live here too." That was when my brother spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smirk. He didn't even sound annoyed. "It's just not practical to factor everyone in," he said. "Someone has to make the call." He said it the way people say gravity exists, neutral, reasonable, final. 3 voices, 1 direction. I felt it then, not anger, not hurt, but clarity. This wasn't a discussion. It was a verdict. My father stood up. That was new. "We're not going to turn this into a scene," he said. "If you can't accept what we've decided, then maybe you need to think about what you actually want." It wasn't a threat. That was what made it dangerous. My mother didn't intervene. She just nodded as if relieved someone had said it out loud. I looked at them, all of them waiting maybe for me to back down, to apologize for the inconvenience of having an opinion. Instead, I went quiet. Not defiant, not dramatic. Just still. The silence stretched longer than they expected, long enough for discomfort to creep in. Finally, my father said it. "If you walk out that door," he said, "you're making a choice." The room went very still. He didn't say, "Don't go." He didn't say, "We'll talk about this." He didn't say, "Come back when you're calm." He said, "choice." A word that sounded fair, balanced, almost generous, but I understood what he meant. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't try to make them understand something they had already decided not to hear. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. That was it. My mother looked startled, not because she cared, but because she hadn't anticipated that response. My brother frowned slightly, recalibrating. My father watched me carefully, as if waiting for the catch. There wasn't one. I stood up from the table and walked to my room. No one followed. Packing took less time than I expected. Not because I didn't own much, but because most of it didn't feel like mine. I skipped the photos, the childhood memorabilia, the things my parents liked to point to when telling stories that didn't include my version. I took close, practical ones. A notebook. One object I'd kept hidden for years because it reminded me of a time someone had seen me without needing proof. That was enough. I left the rest behind without ceremony. What I didn't take mattered more than what I did. The hallway felt longer than usual. Each step echoed with a quiet finality I didn't fully feel yet, but knew I would. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, not blocking my path, not offering help. My brother stayed seated, eyes down, safe in the system he knew how to survive. My father stood near the door. He opened it without being asked. That gesture almost undid me. Almost. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has made a decision you don't respect but won't interfere with. "You know where this leads," he said. I met his eyes. "So do you," I replied. That was the last sentence I ever said to him as his daughter. The door closed behind me with a sound too soft for something so permanent. No one called out. No footsteps followed. No second chances were offered. I stood outside for a moment longer than necessary, adjusting the weight of my bag, letting the air hit my face. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel free. I felt accurate, like I'd finally aligned my actions with the truth I'd been carrying quietly for years. Walking away didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like refusal. Refusal to keep shrinking. Refusal to keep auditioning for a role that would never be mine. Refusal to disappear slowly under the guise of doing what's best. I didn't leave because I hated them. I left because staying meant disappearing. The first morning after I left didn't feel like a beginning. There was no sense of freedom, no relief, no dramatic awareness that my life had split into a before and an after. I woke up because my body did what it had always done, opened its eyes when the light changed. That was it. No one expected me to be anywhere. No one needed confirmation that I was awake. No one was waiting on a response. The day didn't start. It simply continued without checking whether I was ready. The room I was in wasn't temporary in the way people romanticize. It wasn't a stepping stone or a for now. It was functional, a place where sleep happened, where belongings were kept close because there was nowhere else to put them, where sound from outside leaked in without asking permission. I sat up and ran through what needed to be done, not in order of importance, but in order of urgency. Food, work, paperwork. Survival didn't come with a narrative. It came with a checklist. The first form I filled out at the local clinic asked for basic information, name, date of birth, address. Then the cursor blinked at the next line. Emergency contact. I didn't hesitate because I was emotional. I hesitated because there was no correct answer. Not an awkward one, not a painful one, but an invalid one. The system was binary. It required a name and a 10-digit number to proceed to the next screen. It didn't have a checkbox for "I no longer exist" to them. The questions continued, phrased slightly differently each time, as if the software were trying to catch me in a lie. Family members. Next of kin. Relationship to patient. Each box assumed the same thing, that there was a person attached to me who could be called into existence if something went wrong. I tried to type NA, but the box turned red, demanding a valid entry. I eventually typed a fake number just to make the red light go away. I left the identity of my soul blank the way you leave a field blank when the system doesn't accept zeros. That was when it became clear. My family hadn't disappeared emotionally. They had disappeared administratively. There was no record of them in the places that mattered, the places where life asked for proof that you belonged to someone beyond yourself. No names to enter, no numbers to dial, no relationship to verify. They weren't an option I was choosing not to use. They simply weren't available in the system I now existed in. I noticed it everywhere after that, in waiting rooms, at counters, in lines where people leaned forward to say, "You can call my husband," or "My mom is coming to pick me up," secure in the knowledge that someone would answer. I watched signatures happen without thought. Emergency plans discussed casually, responsibility, transferred from one person to another with a nod. No one questioned these exchanges. They were part of this background architecture of adult life. I wasn't excluded. I just wasn't accounted for. The flu hit me 3 weeks after I left. Not dramatically. Just the ordinary kind that makes your body feel like it's moving through heavy water. I woke up with a fever, and the kind of headache that makes light feel like a physical weight against my eyes. I had a shift in 4 hours. I didn't have the luxury of a sick day, not because of the money, but because I hadn't been there long enough to earn the right to be human. I took 2 pills, drank water standing at the sink, and got dressed slowly. I had to time my movements. If I stood up too fast, the room tilted and the walls seemed to pulse. At work, someone asked if I was okay. I said yes. They nodded and moved on. No one sent me home. No one offered to cover my shift. No one suggested I see a doctor. It wasn't cruelty. It was efficient. If I could stand, I could work. That was the only metric that mattered. I made it through the day by breaking it into smaller pieces. Get to the next hour. Get to the next break. Get to the end of the street. When I finally got back to my room, I lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. My phone sat on the small table beside the bed. I thought about calling someone. Not my family, I knew better than that. But someone, anyone, just to hear a voice that knew my name without me having to provide an ID number first. I didn't, because I couldn't think of who that person would be, and because even if I could, I didn't know what I would say. I'm sick, it didn't seem urgent enough. I need help. It didn't seem true enough. I was managing. I was functioning. I was doing what needed to be done. That was supposed to be enough. By morning, the fever had broken. I got up, went to work, and didn't mention it to anyone. That was when I understood. Being alone wasn't the right word. Alone implied absence of company. Erased implied absence of reference. No one disliked me. No one wished me harm. There simply wasn't a scenario where someone else was expected to step in on my behalf. The difference mattered. A month later, I needed to sign a lease. The landlord was an older woman who spoke quickly and didn't make eye contact. She pushed the papers across the desk and pointed to the highlighted sections. Sign here, here, and here. I'll need a deposit and a background check fee, and an emergency contact someone local who can take responsibility if something happens to you. I filled out everything except that line. She noticed immediately. You need to fill that in, she said. It's required for the insurance. I don't have anyone local, I said. She looked at me for the first time, not unkindly, just assessing the risk. Parents, siblings, a friend from the studio, no. She waited like she expected me to elaborate. I didn't. I didn't offer a sad story because I didn't want a pity discount. Finally, she sighed and took the form back. I'll put my daughter's number down, she said. She doesn't need to know. Just don't make me regret it by dying in there. I thanked her. She waved it off. You look like you show up on time, she said. That's all I care about. Pay the rent, keep the noise down, and we're good. I moved in 2 days later. The apartment was small. 1 room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that only ran hot if you didn't touch the knob. But it was mine. No one could tell me to leave unless I stopped paying. No one could decide I didn't belong. For the first time in my life, I lived somewhere that didn't require someone else's approval. I didn't feel angry about any of it. Anger requires friction, something to push against. There was nothing there. No moment where I thought, how could they do this to me? No internal argument about fairness. Just a recalibration. I wasn't abandoned. I thought without emotion. I was removed. Life continued to function around that fact without pause. Shifts overlapped, tasks stacked, time compressed into blocks small enough to manage. I learned quickly which things couldn't wait and which could be ignored indefinitely. There was no room to sit with thoughts. Thinking was inefficient. Thinking didn't move anything forward. The world didn't feel cruel. It felt uninteresting. One afternoon during a routine shift, my body failed me for a fraction of a second. Not a collapse, just a moment where my balance didn't catch up with my movement. I steadied myself against the nearest surface and continued. No one asked if I was okay. No one slowed down. The process moved forward, because processes do not adjust for individual variants unless programmed to. I wasn't. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have not, because it hurt, but because it confirmed something. If I stopped, everything would continue. If I couldn't continue, nothing would pause to accommodate that. This wasn't neglect, it was designed. I didn't consider reaching out not because of pride, not because of resentment, but because I couldn't identify the function it would serve. There was no role for me to return to no position waiting to be reactivated. Contact implies a system that recognizes you as a valid input. I no longer was. Instead, I adjusted quietly, incrementally. I stopped assuming assistance, stopped factoring in external correction, stopped building plans that required a backup. Every decision was made with the understanding that the outcome, good or bad, would belong to me alone. That knowledge didn't feel empowering. It felt necessary. By the time I filled out another form weeks later, my hand moved without hesitation. Emergency contact, blank. I didn't hover. I didn't reconsider. I didn't feel anything about it at all. I moved on to the next section. No one had to abandon me. I had already been removed. The day my body stopped cooperating didn't look dramatic. There was no sharp pain, no collapse, no moment that demanded attention. I woke up and stayed where I was, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my legs to move. They didn't, not because they couldn't, but because they hadn't decided yet. Time passed in fragments. Light shifted. Sound leaked in from somewhere outside. The world moved forward without checking whether I was ready to follow. I lay there longer than usual, not resting, not thinking, just existing in a pause no one else could see. That was the worst part. No one witnessed it. Eventually I sat up. The motion required planning arms first, then my back, then a long second at the edge of the bed while my body recalibrated like a system running without enough memory. I had work later, training after that, a sequence of obligations that didn't care how much I had left. I reached for my phone without thinking. No messages, no missed calls. Nothing that suggested my absence would register. That was normal. Still, something about this morning felt heavier, not sad, just final. I broke the only rule I had kept since leaving. I didn't call, I didn't explain, I didn't frame it gently. I typed 3 words. I'm not okay. No punctuation, no context, no attempt to soften the impact. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, then sent it before I could reconsider. For a moment, I felt exposed, like I had said something aloud in an empty room. I placed the phone face down. Watching it felt worse than not knowing. An hour passed. Nothing. I told myself they might be busy, that this wasn't urgent enough to interrupt a day already planned without me. By evening, I was tired enough to lie down again without resistance. The phone stayed close, not in my hand, just near enough that I would hear it if it decided to matter. It didn't. I slept poorly, not from nightmares, but from the absence of them. The phone was still silent in the morning. I went to work anyway, moved through the shift in muscle memory, smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to. No one noticed the difference, which confirmed something I already knew. The world doesn't slow down for people running on empty. By the second night, I understood what was happening. This wasn't delayed. It wasn't uncertainty. It wasn't someone searching for the right words. It was a decision. That realization didn't come with emotion, just clarity. I still didn't delete the message. Part of me wanted confirmation, not of rejection, but of intent. I got it on the 3rd day. The phone vibrated once, just once. No typing indicator, no follow-up. 3 words. You chose this. No punctuation, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what I had said. Not are you safe, not where you are, not what you need. Just a verdict. I didn't cry right away. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my hand, not rereading the message, not locking the screen. My thoughts didn't spiral. They didn't even argue. They adjusted like something finally clicking into place. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't anger. It was policy. For the first time since leaving, I understood the rules clearly. There was no one behind me, not emotionally, not practically, not administratively. If I fell now, there would be no response time, no escalation, no safety net waiting to activate when things went quiet. I set the phone down carefully, as if roughness might change what it said. It didn't. The next morning I got up. Not because I felt stronger, not because I felt hopeful, but because staying down had become more dangerous than standing. I showered, ate something small, and put on clothes without checking how they looked. I didn't think about the message again until later that night. When I did, it didn't hurt the way I expected. It clarified. I didn't reply, not out of pride, not out of anger, but because replying would mean pretending this was a conversation. It wasn't. It was a boundary drawn from the other side, and I understood it well enough to respect it. From that day on, I changed how I moved through the world, quietly. I stopped assuming someone would catch me if I misstepped, stopped budgeting energy for explanations that wouldn't be received, stopped believing effort guaranteed acknowledgement. Instead, I built rules that didn't rely on permission. Show up anyway. Finish what you start. Don't fall where no one is coming. That night before sleeping, I looked at the message one last time. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't delete it. I let it stay exactly where it was, not as a wound, but as a reminder. If I fell now, no one would come, so I wasn't allowed to fall. At first, I thought it was just fatigue, the kind that disappears after sleep, the kind you earn when you keep going a little longer than planned. But the morning came and the ache was still there. Not sharp, not dramatic, just persistent like something unfinished. My muscles didn't reset overnight. They carried yesterday into today and the day before that into my next movement. Every stretch asked a question. Every step came with a cost. My mind was ready. My body wasn't. I trained anyway. Not harder, not recklessly, just the way I always had, repeating what already existed in my routine, trusting muscle memory to do the thinking for me. There was nothing special about that session, no audience, no pressure to impress, no stakes I could point to, which is why it happened there. The mistake was small, a fraction of a second late, a landing just off its center. I heard a sound that didn't belong to the room. The pain came after. Not screaming, not cinematic, just immediate and undeniable. I tried to stand. My weight shifted wrong like the ground had moved without telling me. The signal didn't reach where it was supposed to go. My body had made a decision without consulting me. I sat down because standing wasn't an option anymore. Every attempt repeated the error. Every correction reminded me that the system I relied on was no longer reliable. No one was there not to rush over, not to ask what happened, not to confirm that something had gone wrong. I waited until the floor stopped feeling unstable beneath me, then stood slowly testing each movement like it might refuse me again. The doctor didn't look surprised. He didn't ask how long I'd been pushing, didn't ask why stopping wasn't an option. He looked at the results, gave a diagnosis, and explained the timeline. Rest, time, caution. If not, the damage wouldn't heal the right way. It wasn't framed as a warning, just information. Permanent wasn't said dramatically. It was said clinically. I nodded. I always nodded. On the way out, I counted the steps to the door and made sure I didn't limp, not because I was hiding anything, but because I was adjusting. The choice didn't present itself as moral. It wasn't right versus wrong. It was safe versus still mine. If I stopped completely, I could preserve what remained. If I didn't, I risked losing more than I already had. But stopping meant waiting, and waiting meant drifting back into a space where nothing was guaranteed except being forgotten. I didn't choose recklessly. I chose narrowly. I wrapped the joint tighter, adjusted my pace, changed how I landed, modified movements until they fit around the injury instead of through it. Every day became an experiment. Some failed, others just hurt less. Pain stopped being a signal and became a parameter, something to manage, something to measure. I learned its patterns when it arrived, when it receded, how far I could go before it demanded attention again. No one applauded that adjustment. No one checked whether it was sustainable. The thought came one morning without warning. What if you stop? Not as fearful, as logic. What if you rest the way you were told? What if you protect what's left? The idea lingered longer than I expected. That was new. I still went to the studio not because I was confident, but because the alternative felt final. I didn't motivate myself, didn't promise this would pay off. I showed up and did what was possible. That became enough. At night, I handled my body the way you handle a task you can't outsource carefully, efficiently, without sentiment. I didn't call anyone. There was no one who could take this on for me. Lying there, I understood something clearly. If I stopped now, I would be safe. And if I stopped now, I would be done. I trained late because no one needed the room. That was the only reason. There was no schedule with my name on it, no slot I was expected to fill. The lights were already dimmed. Half of the mirrors covered the space, clearly in the process of forgetting itself for the night. I wasn't preparing for anything. I was reminding my body that it still knew how to move. The studio wasn't mine. It never had been. I used it when I was allowed to, after cleaning after hours when no one complained. There was no key with my name on it, no guarantee the door would be unlocked tomorrow. I stayed light on the floor, ready to leave if asked. That was how I existed there temporarily. My ankle was taped under my shoe. The joint still complained when I landed certain ways, still reminded me that I was working with borrowed time and diminishing returns. But I had learned how to move around it, how to distribute weight differently, how to finish sequences without letting anyone see where the pain lived. That adjustment had become automatic. I didn't think about it anymore. I just did it. I didn't know anyone was watching. That mattered. There was no shift in my routine, no instinct to impress. I didn't repeat the cleanest sequences or save the strongest movements for the end. I just kept going because that's what I did when no one was looking. I worked through a combination I'd been refining for weeks, not because anyone asked me to, but because leaving it unfinished felt worse than the ache in my legs. The sound came after I finished. A single clap, not loud, not enthusiastic, just enough to interrupt the silence. I turned more confused than startled. No one had ever applauded me when I danced for myself. He stood near the door, not blocking it, not leaning in, just present. Older, maybe mid-50s, dressed in a way that suggested money without announcing it. He didn't rush to speak, didn't fill the space with praise or introductions. That pause felt intentional, like he was giving me time to decide whether to run or stay. I stayed, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. "How long have you been training here?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost neutral, like he was asking about the weather. "A few months," I said. "After hours, when it's available. And before that, other places, wherever I could find space." He nodded slowly, like he was cataloging something. "You favor your left side when you land," he said. "Just slightly. Most people wouldn't notice, but you're compensating for something." I didn't confirm or deny it. I just waited. The questions he asked next weren't the ones I expected. He didn't ask what I wanted to become, didn't ask where I trained or who I trained with. He asked how long I practiced when no one was watching, who corrected me when there was no one to correct me, how I decided what to fix when feedback didn't exist. I answered honestly, because there was nothing to sell. "I record myself sometimes," I said. "On my phone. I watch it back and look for what doesn't match what I meant to do. Then I try again. And when you can't fix it, I adjust. I found a different way to get to the same place." He was quiet for a moment, watching me in that same assessing way. "You've been doing this alone for a while," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" I didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe I had too many. "Because stopping felt worse," I said finally. He smiled, then just barely, just enough to soften the edges of his face. "That's the only reason that matters," he said. He walked further into the room, not toward me, just away from the door. He moved like someone comfortable in spaces like this, like he'd spent enough time in studios to know where to stand without disrupting the air. "You do something most trained dancers forget," he said. "You finish sequences even when no one's counting. You don't stop at the hard part and start over. You push through and clean it up after. That tells me you're not performing for an audience, you're solving a problem." I didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever described my dancing that way before. "I'm putting together a project," he said. "High profile, international. It's not public yet, so I can't give you details. But I'm looking for people who know how to work when no one's watching. People who don't need applause to show up." He paused, letting that settle. "I'd like you to audition." The word caught me off guard. "Audition?" "More of an assessment," he said. "I need to see if you can do this under pressure with other people in the room when the stakes are real. If you can, there's a place for you. If you can't, at least you'll know." "Why me?" The question came out before I could stop it. He looked at me directly, then no hesitation, no politeness softening the truth. "Because I've been watching you for 3 weeks," he said. "I've seen you come in here after midnight work until your legs shake, then come back the next night and do it again. I've seen you tape that ankle and keep going. I've seen you miss steps and fix them without anyone telling you what went wrong. That's not talent, that's discipline, and discipline is harder to teach." 3 weeks. He'd been watching for 3 weeks, and I hadn't known. The thought should have unsettled me, but it didn't. It clarified something. This wasn't random. This wasn't luck. This was someone who had decided I was worth the effort of observation. When he told me who he was, it wasn't dramatic. No resume, no credentials. Just a name I'd heard before in passing. Someone connected to brands, to campaigns, to projects that moved through the industry without needing to announce themselves. The kind of person whose calls got answered. "There's a gala coming up," he said. "In a few weeks. It's not the project I mentioned, but it's adjacent. I'll need people there who can perform under scrutiny. If you're interested, I'll send you the details." He didn't wait for me to agree. He just assumed I would. And maybe that assumption mattered more than anything else he'd said. He saw me as someone who would say yes, not out of desperation, but out of capability. "One more thing," he said, already turning toward the door. "When you get there, don't try to fit in. Don't try to impress anyone. Just do what you do when you think no one's watching. That's what I'm paying for." He left before I could respond. The door closed quietly behind him, and the studio returned to its previous state, quiet, borrowed, temporary. But something had shifted, not in the room, in me. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, replaying the conversation, testing it for cracks, for conditions I'd missed, for warnings I should have heard. There weren't any, or if there were, I couldn't see them yet. I walked out into the night without relief, without certainty, just aware that someone had noticed I was still here, and that might cost more than I understood yet. But for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. Someone had looked at me and seen not what I was trying to become, but what I already was. And somehow, that was enough to make me believe I could survive whatever came next. I wasn't early, I wasn't late. I arrived at the exact time written in the message, which already told me something important. This wasn't about me. The room was bigger than the ones I was used to. Not warmer, not more welcoming, just more efficient. Mirrors everywhere, music already cued people, stretching without looking around to see who else was there. No one introduced me. No one needed to. I wasn't special enough to require context. There were others more than I expected, younger mostly. Some with bodies that fit the unspoken standard more naturally. Some who moved like they'd been trained to survive rooms like this. They didn't stare. They didn't size me up. They focused on themselves. That was worse. No one hated me. That was the problem. No one needed to. The work started without ceremony. A woman in black, mid-30s, clipboard and hand expression neutral, stepped to the front of the room. "We're running combinations," she said. "No breaks between rounds. If you can't keep up, step to the side. If you step to the side, you're done." No introduction, no welcome, just parameters. Counts were called. Music started. Bodies moved in sync, or tried to. I found my place in the second row and followed the sequence as it was demonstrated, fast, technical, unforgiving. No one repeated anything twice. If you missed it the first time, you figured it out, or you failed visibly. I kept up, barely. My ankle protested on the turns, but I'd learned how to mask it, how to land differently, how to compensate without broadcasting weakness. Around me, others adjusted too, some smoothly, some less so. One girl in the front stumbled on a pivot. No one stopped. No one acknowledged it. She corrected herself and kept going, but I saw the tightness in her jaw. She knew it had been logged. During the first water break, someone spoke near me. Not to me, just near me. A tall girl with perfect posture and the kind of face that photographs well. "If you can't do it today," she said to no one in particular, "they'll just get someone else tomorrow." It wasn't a threat. It was information. The girl beside her nodded like this was common knowledge. I understood then no one had to dislike you to remove you. The second round was harder. Faster counts, less recovery time between sequences. I missed a beat, just one. Not enough to stop the music, not enough to earn a correction, but enough to feel the air shift. The woman with the clipboard didn't look at me. She didn't write anything down. But I knew. Something had been logged. That silence stayed with me because silence meant evaluation. Halfway through the session, someone else made a mistake. A guy in the back row, strong technique, confident energy, lost his balance on a jump and landed hard. He recovered quickly, kept going, and didn't break rhythm. But when the music stopped, the woman with the clipboard walked over to him. "You're done for today," she said. Not unkindly, not cruelly, just factually. He nodded, grabbed his bag, and left. No argument, no second chance. No one watched him go. I started noticing how observation worked here. No one stared openly, no one took obvious notes, but people remembered, and memory in this place was a kind of weapon. The girl who had stumbled earlier was trying too hard now, over-rotating turns, adding flourishes that weren't in the choreography, pushing beyond what was asked. I watched her tire herself out, watched the precision slip as exhaustion set in. She wanted to be noticed. She didn't understand that being noticed here meant being scrutinized. I made a different choice. I stopped trying to stand out, not because I couldn't, but because standing out burned fast. I focused on being consistent, on being reliable, on being there every time, exactly when expected, doing exactly what was required. Not more, not less. That choice wasn't heroic, it was strategic. By the end of the session, 3 people had been dismissed, quietly, efficiently, no explanations offered. The room thinned, and those of us who remained didn't celebrate. We just kept going. Afterward in the hallway, I overheard 2 others talking. "Did you see Maya?" one of them said. "She didn't even show up today." "She's out," the other replied. "Didn't make the cut." They told her. They didn't have to. She just stopped getting messages. I walked past them without slowing down, but the conversation stayed with me. One day someone didn't show up. No explanation. No farewell. Her name just vanished from the schedule. No one mentioned it. Work continued. That was when it clicked. This place didn't fire people. It erased them. I adjusted my thinking. This wasn't about loyalty or passion or being chosen. It was about remaining useful, about proving every single day that removing me would cost more than keeping me, about being the kind of reliable that didn't require supervision. I stopped asking myself if I belonged. Belonging wasn't a metric here. A week later, something shifted. During a break, the woman with the clipboard approached me, not publicly, not in front of others, just a quiet moment near the water station. "Someone asked about you," she said. Her tone gave nothing away. "Who?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Just keep doing what you're doing." Then she walked away. I didn't know who had asked. I didn't know what they wanted. I only knew that my name had moved, that somewhere in the machinery of this place someone had noticed I was still here, and that meant I had survived long enough to matter, even if only slightly. I left that day without relief, but without panic too, because fear loses power once you understand its rules. I wasn't safe. I would never be safe. But I was visible enough to be accounted for, and invisible enough not to be threatened. I wasn't irreplaceable. That fantasy belonged to people with safety nets. But I could be impossible to ignore. I could be the one who never missed a session, never complained, never broke under pressure. I could be the one they forgot to remove, because removing me would mean finding someone just as reliable, and reliability was rarer than talent. And that would have to be enough. The message came without warning. No greeting, no context, no name, just a time and an address. I read it twice, waiting for the explanation that never followed. Real opportunities don't explain themselves. They assume you'll show up. The building didn't look important. No sign, no logo, no receptionist smiling too hard. Glass doors, clean lines, the kind of architecture that costs more because it looks like it costs less. Everything worked smoothly without asking to be noticed. That was the first signal this place didn't need validation. I arrived early. No one acknowledged it. The elevator opened without a key card. I rode it to the floor listed in the message and stepped into a hallway that smelled like expensive nothing. No air freshener, no cleaning products, just the absence of anything cheap. I arrived at the right door. No one asked who I was. I understood then this wasn't about welcoming me in. It was about seeing if I belonged enough not to be stopped. The room was quiet, was not empty, just controlled. People moved with purpose, not urgency. A woman adjusting lights, a man reviewing something on a tablet, another person marking positions on the floor with tape that would be removed later. No one rushed to impress. Power doesn't hurry. The person who mattered sat at a table near the back wall. Mid-40s dark suit posture that suggested they'd stopped trying to prove anything years ago. They didn't stand up when I entered, didn't smile, didn't introduce themselves. They looked at me the way someone looks at weather, assessing conditions, not emotions. "You're the one he recommended," they said. Not a question, a confirmation. I nodded. They gestured to the center of the room. "Show me." No warm-up, no explanation of what they wanted to see. I walked to the marked space on the floor and waited. The music started mid-track, no count-in, no preparation. The floor wasn't forgiving. This wasn't designed for me to succeed. It was designed to reveal if I could function anyway. I moved. Not beautifully, not bravely, efficiently. Like someone who knew this wasn't a performance, it was a test of survival. I could feel the comparison not to anyone in the room, but to an invisible standard I had never been taught and was expected to meet anyway. My ankle held, my balance adjusted, my body remembered what my mind had stopped questioning. When the music stopped, no one clapped. No nods, no notes. Just silence, the kind that stretches long enough to make you doubt yourself, but not long enough to invite explanation. The person at the table leaned back slightly. "You compensate well," they said. "Most people hide injuries. You integrate them." I didn't know if that was a compliment or an observation. I didn't respond. "Can you do that under pressure?" they asked. "In front of people who matter, when there's no second take?" "Yes." They watched me for a moment longer, then nodded once. "You'll be needed for an event, high profile, public. You won't be the focus, but you'll be visible. Can you handle that?" "What's the event?" "A gala, luxury brand launch, international audience. You'll be part of the presentation movement atmosphere, visual storytelling. You'll rehearse with the team starting next week. If you can't commit fully, say so now." I thought about my schedule, my shifts, the room I was renting, the carefully balanced precarity of my life. None of it mattered. This was the door. You either walked through or you didn't. "I can commit," I said. "Good." They stood then, signaling the end of the conversation. "Someone will send you details. Don't be late. Don't miss rehearsals. Don't assume anything is optional." I nodded and turned to leave. "One more thing," they said. I stopped. "He doesn't recommend people often. Don't make him regret it." I walked out of that building with the same bag I'd walked in with, but something had changed. Not in what I carried, in what I was carrying toward. My schedule changed overnight. Earlier mornings, later nights, rehearsals that didn't care if I was tired, if my body hurt, if I had other obligations. I quit 2 shifts, rearranged the rest. I stopped sleeping as much, stopped eating as well. I didn't call anyone. There was no one to celebrate with. And nothing to celebrate. Being chosen at this level wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility with consequences. The rehearsals were precise, clinical, every movement timed to the second, every transition mapped, every lighting cue is memorized. We weren't dancers in the traditional sense. We were elements, variables, moving pieces in a larger design that no one explained fully because we didn't need to understand it, we just needed to execute it. I met the others on the team. Some were dancers, some were models, some were something in between. No one shared their background. No one asked about mine. We worked in parallel intersecting only when the choreography required it. There was no camaraderie, no shared meals or inside jokes. Just the work and the understanding that we were all replaceable until the moment we proved we weren't. Every move now carried weight. Not emotional weight, professional weight. Mistakes wouldn't be corrected. They'd be remembered. I learned quickly, being inside didn't mean being safe. It meant being visible. And visibility in this world was a double-edged gift. At the end of one long rehearsal, someone mentioned the guest list, casually, in passing. "They're expecting major names," a girl said, pulling her hair back into a ponytail. "Old money, new money, people who decide what matters next year." Another person laughed. "Good luck not messing up in front of them." I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I already knew what that meant. This wasn't just a performance, it was a threshold. The kind of event where reputations were built or buried in a single evening, where the people watching had the power to open doors I didn't even know existed or close them permanently. I walked home that night thinking about doors, the ones I'd been pushed through, the ones I'd walked away from, the ones that had closed behind me without warning. And now this one, unmarked, unannounced, already shutting before I'd fully stepped inside. Some doors don't have signs. They don't announce what waits on the other side. They just close behind you and remove the option of hiding. I didn't know who would be watching. I didn't know if my family would be there in that room, in that audience, witnessing the moment I stopped being invisible. But I knew there would be no place to hide. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I didn't arrive the way people arrive when they belong somewhere. No one checked my name at the entrance. No one introduced me as anyone worth remembering. I wasn't a guest of honor, not even a guest in the traditional sense. I was part of the program, a moving piece, something scheduled, not celebrated. I walked into the gala knowing exactly where I stood present, but unacknowledged. The room was full of people who knew how to be seen. I knew how to stay still. The space itself was impressive, in the way money prefers quiet, expensive, intentionally effortless. Conversations moved smoothly. Laughter landed at the right volume. Glasses were refilled before anyone noticed they were empty. This was a room designed to reward familiarity. I wasn't unfamiliar with spaces like this, but I hadn't been welcomed into one in 7 years. I had performed earlier part of the opening presentation movement, woven into the brand, reveal my body used to create atmosphere the way lighting or music might be used. It had gone smoothly. No mistakes, no stumbles. I had done what I was paid to do, then stepped back into the margins where people like me were supposed to wait. Now I was just another body in the room, indistinguishable from the servers, except that I wasn't carrying a tray. I noticed my family before they noticed me. They always entered rooms like they expected the architecture to adjust around them. My father moved with a calculated confidence, his hand extended to people who clearly mattered. My mother smiled in that controlled, practiced way that suggested status without the burden of warmth. My brother followed half a step behind, already comfortable in the role he'd been trained for, observant, agreeable, perfectly aligned. They didn't look for me. They had no reason to. In their version of reality, I was a closed chapter. I watched them from across the room, not hiding, just observing. They belonged. People turned toward them, leaned in, laughed at their cues. They were still standing on the side of the world that opens doors automatically. I stayed where I was, close enough to see the texture of my mother's dress, far enough not to interrupt the picture they were used to being part of. When they finally saw me, it wasn't recognition. It was a glitch in their evening. My mother's eyes slid past me once, then snapped back. My father tilted his head the way you do when you're trying to identify a minor stain on a carpet. My brother recognized me last, and his expression remained a flat, neutral mask. They approached. I didn't move. I didn't prepare a speech. I just stood my ground. My father spoke first, his tone light, almost amused. "So," he said, looking me up and down as if checking for dust, "you're still dancing." The words still carried all the weight he intended. It implied I was stagnant. It implied I was still chasing a girl's dream while the rest of them were building an empire. "I am," I said. My voice was steady, which seemed to irritate him. My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. "I'm genuinely surprised the organizers didn't check the credentials more thoroughly," she said, her voice a soft, polite blade. "Events of this caliber usually have a filter for the background talent. It's a bit distracting seeing you here like this." "I was invited to be here, Mother," I replied. She didn't flinch at the word mother. She just looked past my shoulder. To do what exactly? Provide the creative atmosphere. "It's a pity. You could have been sitting at the main table if you'd just listened 7 years ago. Instead, you're standing in the shadows with the help." My brother stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was his favorite way to exert power. "Look, Mia, you made your choice. You walked out and chose a life of art over this family. You can't just haunt these rooms and expect a seat at the table. It's embarrassing for everyone involved." "I'm not expecting a seat," I said. "I'm just standing in a room I earned my way into." My father laughed, a short, dry sound. "Earned, you're a detail, Mia. A backdrop. Don't confuse being used for being invited. They needed a body to move on a stage and you were available. That's the extent of your success." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Now do us a favor. Don't make a scene. We have people to meet who actually matter." My mother adjusted her shawl, her face hardening into the expression she used when dismissively tipping a waiter. "We should go, Arthur. I don't want the Millers to see us talking to the performers. It's hard enough to explain why our daughter is a runaway. I don't want to explain why she's lingering near us like a ghost." My brother was the last to speak. He looked at me with a cold, clear-eyed finality. "You don't belong in this room, Mia. You're just a dancer who ran away. Don't forget that when the lights go down." They turned away then. Not dramatically, not with a flourish, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of people closing a book they've finished reading. They walked back into the crowd, merging perfectly with the sea of silk and tailored wool. I didn't follow. I didn't call out. I stayed exactly where I was, letting the air they'd occupied settle back into place. No one nearby noticed the dismantling that had just happened. The gala didn't slow down. Someone clinked a glass. A laugh rose from a nearby table. That was the part that hit me, how normal the cruelty looked. I moved to the edge of the room, not out of shame, but to get a better view. From there, I could see the stage. The MC was stepping into position. The energy was shifting. People were turning, checking their watches, preparing for the main event. My family was somewhere in the front, convinced the night had returned to its natural order. My father was already nodding at a man in a tuxedo. My mother was smiling at a woman in diamonds. They were so sure I was nothing, so sure I was just a variable they had successfully managed. I felt my heart beat heavy, factual, steady. Not with fear, not even with anger anymore, just with the knowledge that the script they had written for me was about to be burned in front of their eyes. They thought they had seen the last of me. They thought I was the backdrop. The MC lifted the microphone. I took a breath and waited for my name to change everything. The room was ready before anyone realized what they were ready for. Conversations, softened bodies angled toward the stage. Attention gathered the way it always does when people expect something important to happen. There was nothing unusual about that moment. No warning, no tension anyone could name, just the familiar anticipation of recognition being handed to someone else. I stood where I had been standing, slightly off to the side, close enough to hear clearly, far enough not to be noticed. My family had already moved on. In their minds, the night was complete. Whatever they needed to say to me had been said, and whatever version of me they carried had been put back where it belonged. Then the person holding the microphone stepped forward. I recognized him immediately. The man from the studio, the one who had watched me practice for 3 weeks before saying a single word. He moved with the same quiet authority he'd had that night. No performance, no pretense, just the certainty of someone who knew his presence was enough. There was no dramatic introduction, no list of credentials meant to impress the room. He didn't need one. The shift was immediate and instinctive. People straightened without realizing they were doing it. Conversation stopped entirely. This wasn't the kind of attention that asks for permission. It arrives and takes its place. When he spoke, his voice didn't carry excitement or warmth. It carried certainty. "I don't believe in potential," he began. "Potential is what we call talent that hasn't proven itself yet. It's a placeholder, a promise, and promises are easy to make." He paused, letting the room settle into the silence. "What I believe in is discipline. The kind that shows up when no one is counting. The kind that continues when applause isn't guaranteed. The kind that most people mistake for stubbornness until it becomes undeniable." I felt my pulse slow, not from calm, but from the strange suspension that happens when you realize something irreversible is unfolding. He didn't talk about legacy. He didn't mention families, backgrounds, sacrifices, or journeys. He spoke about work, about consistency when no one is watching, about choosing people not for how well they present themselves in rooms like this, but for what they've proven when no one bothered to look. The words were calm, almost understated, but the effect was surgical. The room leaned in, not emotionally but instinctively, as if something valuable was being revealed. "Tonight," he continued, "we're announcing a partnership that represents more than a business decision. It represents a commitment to excellence that doesn't require validation, it simply exists. And the person we've chosen to embody that standard is someone most of you have already seen tonight, though I suspect many of you didn't notice." Then he said my name. Clearly, once, without emphasis, without hesitation. "Mia Hartwell." For a fraction of a second, nothing happened, not because people hadn't heard it, but because they were recalibrating. Eyes moved, faces shifted. Someone near the stage turned around, first scanning the room, then another, then several more. The energy didn't explode. It was redirected.
Attention snapped from the stage to the crowd, searching, connecting, reassigning importance in real time. I felt it before I saw it, the way space opens when a room decides you matter. People stepped aside without meaning to. Someone whispered my name to confirm it was real. Another person looked down at their phone, already cross-checking. The same body that had been invisible minutes earlier was now being located, oriented, repositioned. Across the room, my family froze. My father stopped mid-step, his posture stiffening as understanding caught up to sound. The glass in his hand tilted slightly, forgotten. My mother turned slowly, her expression tightening eyes, searching for context that no longer existed. Her smile, the practiced, controlled one she wore in rooms like this, dissolved into something sharper. Confusion, then recognition, then something I couldn't name. My brother didn't move at all. He simply stared, as if still expecting the room to correct itself to restore the version of events he was more comfortable with. It didn't. I watched them process it. I watched my father's face shift from confusion to comprehension to something that looked almost like betrayal, as if I had broken an unspoken rule by succeeding without their permission. I watched my mother's jaw tighten, her hands clasping together in front of her, a gesture I recognized from childhood. It meant she was recalculating. I watched my brother blink slowly, like someone trying to wake up from a dream that refused to end. I didn't rush forward. I didn't smile. I didn't look at them. I moved when it made sense to move, when the path toward the stage was already clear, when stepping forward felt like the natural continuation of what had already been decided without me. I walked calmly, evenly, as if this were not the most significant shift of the night, because for me, the decision had been years in the making. The introduction continued as I approached the stage. "Mia will serve as the global brand ambassador for our new collection," he said. "She represents what we value most, not just technical excellence, but the integrity to maintain that excellence when no one is applauding. She's someone who has built a career not on visibility, but on reliability, not on who knows her, but on what she's proven." He extended a hand as I reached the stage. I took it. The handshake was brief, professional, but the look he gave me said something else. "You earned this. Don't forget that." Titles were mentioned, responsibilities outlined. The role I was being given was named without embellishment: ambassador. The word hung in the air with weight I hadn't assigned to it. A partnership with one of the most prestigious luxury brands in the world. Not a performance, not a temporary contract. A face, a voice, a representation of excellence that extended far beyond one evening. No one spoke about my family. No one referenced where I came from. Nothing in the official narrative required their existence. That was the part they hadn't anticipated. They had spent my entire life constructing a story where I was the failed variable, the one who chose wrong, the daughter who didn't matter. And now, in front of everyone who mattered to them, that story had been overwritten, not with confrontation, not with explanation, but with simple, undeniable fact. Behind me, I could feel the room reorganizing itself. People who had been laughing with my parents minutes earlier now hesitated, unsure whether to continue. Conversations stalled. Familiar faces turned away, redirected by the gravity of the moment. My family hadn't been publicly criticized. They hadn't been exposed or accused. They had simply lost their place. I stood where I was supposed to stand. I listened as he finished the announcement outlining the campaign timeline, the international markets we'd be launching, in the scope of what this partnership meant. I nodded when appropriate. I accepted what was being handed to me with steady hands. I didn't scan the room for reactions. I didn't check to see if my family was watching. The truth didn't require their acknowledgement anymore. When it was over, applause filled the space, not wild, not emotional, but decisive. People clap the way they do when they understand something important has just been confirmed. I stepped back from the microphone and descended from the stage, moving back into the crowd that now parted for me differently than it had an hour ago. As the sound settled, I realized something quietly without satisfaction or relief. I hadn't embarrassed them. I hadn't taken anything from them. I had simply stopped protecting their version of the story. And in doing so, I had written a new one where their opinion of me no longer defined what I was capable of becoming. Somewhere in the room, my family was still standing, still processing, still trying to reconcile the daughter they had dismissed with the woman whose name had just been announced to a room full of people who mattered. But I didn't look for them. I didn't need to see their faces to know what this meant. For 7 years, I had been erased. Tonight, I had been rewritten. And this time, I was the one holding the pen. The room emptied the way important rooms always do. Slowly at first, then all at once, conversations softened into farewells, heels retreated toward exits. Staff began resetting the space as if nothing irreversible had just happened. My heart rate took longer to follow. It steadied eventually, but not because of relief. Winning publicly doesn't come with a matching sense of peace. It just leaves you alone with the truth, sooner than you expected. I didn't leave immediately. I stood near the edge of the room, watching the space transform from event back to emptiness. The stage lights dimmed. The chairs were stacked. The microphone that had spoken my name was already being packed away. In an hour, there would be no evidence that anything significant had happened here. But the people who witnessed it would remember. That was the part that mattered. My phone lit up before I reached the door. Messages stacked themselves without urgency. Congratulations that sounded practiced. Invitations framed as curiosity opportunities dressed as casual interest. I read them in the quiet between steps, then put the phone away. None of it felt unreal. None of it felt like a miracle. It felt like the world was finally responding to work it had ignored long enough. For the first time that night, I noticed how my name moved differently now. It traveled ahead of me. It opened conversations I didn't have to start. People spoke it carefully as if the sound itself carried weight. A woman I'd never met stopped me near the exit. "That was remarkable," she said. Not the announcement, the fact that I'd stayed composed. Most people would have cried or made a speech. You just stood there like you'd been expecting it all along. I had been, I said. Not expecting this exact moment, but expecting that work eventually reveals itself. That invisibility, when sustained long enough, becomes its own kind of presence. She handed me her card. "Call me if you ever want to talk about what comes next." I took it not because I needed it, but because I understood what she was really saying. You're not alone anymore, whether you want that or not. My family existed somewhere outside the frame, not absent, just irrelevant. I didn't see them leave. I didn't look for them in the thinning crowd. No one asked me how they were. No one leaned in to whisper questions about what had happened between us. The room had already decided whose story mattered, and theirs no longer required maintenance. That was the quietest consequence of all, not humiliation, not confrontation, but the slow loss of narrative power. Revenge doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like silence that sticks. I walked home that night instead of taking a car. The city was loud in the way cities are after midnight, alive, indifferent, continuing without permission. I needed the noise. I needed the movement. I needed to feel my body doing something ordinary after a night that had redefined everything. When I finally reached my apartment, the small one-room place with the shower that only ran hot if you didn't touch the knob, I sat on the edge of my bed and let the night catch up to me. Not the triumph, not the validation, the exhaustion. I had been holding my body in a specific shape for hours, and now that I was alone, I could let it collapse. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt it was accurate, like I had finally aligned what I knew about myself with what the world was willing to see. That alignment didn't erase the 7 years I'd spent invisible. It didn't undo the nights I'd gone to bed wondering if I'd made the wrong choice by leaving. It didn't rewrite the loneliness or the fear or the moments when my body failed and no one was there to catch me. But it confirmed something I'd needed confirmed. I hadn't been wrong. I had just been early. 3 days later, the attempt arrived. Not a call they wouldn't risk my voice, my tone, my ability to respond in real time. A text message from my mother. "We saw you at the gala. We'd like to talk. It's been too long. Maybe we can meet for coffee." I read it twice, then a third time. The words were careful, measured, scrubbed clean of any acknowledgement of what had actually happened. No apology for what they'd said to me that night. No recognition of the 7 years of silence. No mention of the fact that they'd only reached out after my name had been announced in a room full of people who mattered to them. Timing is a language, and this one spoke fluently. Nothing about them had changed. Only my circumstances had. I sat with the idea longer than I expected, not because I wanted to reopen anything, but because I wanted to understand my own hesitation. Part of me, the part that still remembered being 13 and wanting my mother to smile at my report card, the way she smiled at my brothers, wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that reconciliation was possible, that families could heal that time, and distance could soften the edges of what had been broken. But another part of me, the part that had survived without them, knew better. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a single action. It's a question you ask yourself when you finally have room to ask it honestly. What would this give me, and what would it take away? Healing isn't guaranteed by access, and closure isn't owed to people who only seek it when you become legible to the world. I answered once, briefly, kindly, firmly. I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm not ready for that. I need more time. I hope you understand. But, I didn't say what I was really thinking. That more time was a kindness I didn't owe them. That I might never be ready. That their version of reconciliation coffee small talk, pretending the past didn't happen, wasn't something I was interested in performing. The sentence didn't carry anger. It didn't need to. Distance had already done the work anger used to do for me. My mother didn't reply. My father didn't reach out separately. My brother stayed silent. That told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't been looking for reconnection. They'd been looking for rehabilitation, a way to reinsert themselves into a narrative that now included me as someone worth knowing, when I didn't offer that they moved on. Again. Life didn't become lighter after that. It became heavier in different ways, more responsibility, fewer excuses, pressure without sympathy, and expectations that didn't bend. The campaign launched. My face appeared in airports, on billboards, and magazines I used to walk past without being able to afford. People recognized me in places I'd once been invisible. The work intensified. The stakes rose. There were moments when I missed the simplicity of being no one, when the weight of being seen felt more suffocating than the years I'd spent unseen. But the weight felt chosen, earned, honest. I knew what it cost because I had already paid it. Some nights, a memory surfaced uninvited. My father's voice dismissive and easy, calling me just a dancer. The phrase no longer tightened anything inside me. It arrived the way old weather does, recognizable, harmless, incapable of changing what stands now. That was how I knew something fundamental had healed. Pain doesn't announce its departure. It just stops demanding your attention. One evening, 6 months after the gala, I returned to the studio where it had all started, the one I'd used after hours when no one needed the room. The door was unlocked. The lights were dim. I stepped inside and stood in the center of the floor, the same spot where I'd been standing the night he first saw me. I didn't dance. I just stood there remembering who I'd been, then exhausted, uncertain, working with a body that hurt, and a future that promised nothing. I remembered the girl who had kept going, not because she believed she'd succeed, but because stopping felt worse. I wasn't that girl anymore, but I hadn't abandoned her either. She was still there in every movement I made, in every choice I defended, in every moment I refused to shrink. She had carried me here, and I owed her the dignity of remembering that. I don't believe in neat endings. I believe in decisions that hold. I didn't take anything back from my family. I didn't rewrite the past. I didn't win an argument that had once felt endless. I stepped out of it. There's a difference. The life I live now isn't perfect. It asks more of me than comfort ever did. But it lets me choose. It lets me say no without apology and yes without fear. It lets me keep my name intact. I didn't win against anyone. I just didn't lose myself. And if you're still listening, maybe it's because some version of this story touched something familiar. Maybe you've been told you weren't enough, or that what you loved was just a phase, or that your place in a room depended on how useful you were to someone else. If that's true, I want to know what you did next. What happens when the people closest to you stop seeing you? If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. And if you want more stories like this, you already know what to do.